Yeah, good evening. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? It's great to be with you on a Sunday night. If some of you were also together with us in that talk, I was interviewed by Jessica Shaw for a legacies talk for the Museum of the Holocaust in New York. It was a great talk. You can find a link to it on the Accidental Talmudist Facebook page. So welcome if there's any newcomers to our class tonight who might have heard about us during that talk. Let's light up the darkness. All right, and I understand that on the East Coast, there's a big snowstorm coming down, so I hope that everybody is safe and snug in their own warm place. Who is with us as we do a little learning on a Sunday evening? Paula in Chicago, Yehudit in South Carolina, Samantha in Tacoma, Melissa in Great Neck, Pauline in Arkansas, Renee in Indy, John in Sedona, Christo in Lubbock. Harold says, great talk today. Thanks for sharing it all. Thank you, Harold. James in Indianapolis. Susan, hello from another day in lockdown London. Oy vavoy. May this plague end soon so that we can get back to our lives, and particularly so the children can get back to school. Rose in New Mexico, Stephen in New Hampshire, Jill in Illinois, Margaret in Rincon, Puerto Rico. Bienvenida, Margaret. Where am I? Matt in Eau Claire. Pete Engel says, Sal, great job on your earlier program. Thank you so much, Peter. Marjorie in Georgia saying your interview was wonderful in the true sense, full of the wonder of Hashem. Thank you so much, Marjorie. Moshe says, Shalom. Gail in Virginia also saying thanks for the Holocaust story you shared earlier. Thank you, Gail. Lucy in Minnesota. Michael in Scranton. Paul in Minneapolis. Wow, big crowd tonight. Pauline says, great interview. Baruch Hashem, your grandmother's and mother's lives were miracles. Agreed. They really were miracles. The fact that we're here, that I'm here with you, a miracle all the way. Baruch Hashem. I didn't realize so many people were there. This is great. Carolyn saying shalom from Raleigh. Also enjoyed the talk. Michael says buenas noches. Randy in Florida, Cindy in Connecticut, Crystal in Canada, Janice says amen, Christine says from Marshall, Missouri, and Michael from Fresno, California. Welcome, everybody. It's really great to be together. And over there on the YouTube side, Lynn in Texas and Gigi in British Columbia. Tonight's episode of AT Daily, very special dedication. This comes from Brina Bloomfeld, who's just a great contributor to our class. I'm pretty sure she's in Massachusetts. Yes, in Sharon, Massachusetts. Brina is dedicating tonight's episode. Please dedicate the learning on Sunday evening, Yud Teshuvah, so this date, January 31st, to the memory of our daughter, Rachel Natalie Bloomfeld. Her Hebrew name, Rachel Netanya Bas Shmuel V'Brina. She died at 1 month of age 25 years ago. And, obviously the memory of Rachel Netanya has never left Brina for a moment. She feels that her daughter's so close to her. And though she only had 1 month in this world, she has just made an impact in Brina and Shmuel's life. So we remember her today. We pray that the merit of our learning together this evening will resound to Rachel Netanya's credit there in the world of souls. There's actually an old Jewish teaching that when a child dies so tragically young, this is actually the soul of a great tzaddik, a very righteous person who had just a little bit of work to do left in some other lifetime, and she came back here just for that 1 month. There was a reason. There was some kind of a reason that she came into this world, even for only 1 month. And who knows, she obviously touched her parents' lives, and who knows how Brinna and the way that she's been touched in her life by that short stay of her daughter in this world has affected her in the way that she's dealt with others. I know Brinna's a great soul, a great learner, and a great tzaddikus, a righteous person whose kindness stretches forth to others. And so we wish that your daughter of blessed memory, her neshama, her soul, may have a great aliyah, great elevation in the world of souls. And Brinna, may you and your husband and all your loved ones be showered in blessings from heaven. And we say amen. All right, where we're holding is Daf Ayin Aleph, so page 71 here in Tractate Pesachim, the fourth volume of the Talmud, the laws of Passover. We're in chapter 6. We're going to be completing our discussion of the second Mishna in chapter 6. But you know what? Before I get to these points that I want to share on today's page from the Talmud, I want to share a story with you that we found this past Shabbos, yesterday, in Ami magazine. So full credit to Ami magazine for sharing this, and specifically Yedidja Levin for sharing this story in the tail end column of Ami magazine. Amazing, amazing story, and I just wanted to share it with our community. So this story was told, okay, so it was first set down in 1924, and the person who first recorded it in writing in 1924 heard it at a shiva, right? So a shiva is the mourning that follows when a Jew dies, and then the family sits shiva for 7 days, and people come and pay their respects, try to comfort the mourners and recall the departed during the 7 days of mourning. So the writer who originally heard this story, like I said, in 1924, heard it at a shiva house from the son of Abraham Hyman. Who was Abraham Hyman? Abraham Hyman was a German Jew who emigrated to the United States in the 1830s. Penniless, arrived in this country like so many, seeking the American dream, and was getting by as a peddler, right? There were so many Jews who came to this country and they would just scrape a few dollars together or borrow to buy some dry goods that they would carry in a wagon or sometimes on their back and go door to door and selling these things that homeowners could use. I don't know what exactly. Gloves, pots, pans, housewares, homewares, right? Things that people could use. So Abraham was peddling goods door to door in the 1830s in Massachusetts. Massachusetts, as we well know, as Brinna knows right now, cold place in the winter. And Abraham had the misfortune of being caught in the winter in Massachusetts during a terrible blizzard. Now, what do? It's not like you can just, huddle in your car. He didn't have a car. He went from one home to another explaining his predicament. But this, essentially bedraggled Jew, a poor person working door to door it's not someone that the Massachusetts homeowners were welcoming into their homes even during this blizzard. He was really growing desperate. He saw a large house on a hill, basically freezing to death. Gets to that house, knocks on the door. A butler opens the door, sees this poor, ragged peddler, Jewish peddler, and is basically about to slam the door in his face, certainly not invite him in, when a voice from inside the house said, "Wait a minute, tell him to come inside." Who was that person? John Quincy Adams, former president of the United States. This happened at his home in Peacefield. Actually, this is the Adams estate where John and Abigail Adams had also lived, and later John Quincy Adams and his family lived there. So John Quincy Adams took pity on this Jew caught in the terrible blizzard, asked him in. The Jew could barely speak English, right? He was like literally fresh off the boat, could speak German, obviously could speak Yiddish. Amazingly, John Quincy Adams had spent some time living in Germany as a diplomat earlier in his life, and so was able to converse with the Jew in German and learned what he was all about, that he was recently from Germany, that he was, trying to make a living peddling his wares, caught in the blizzard, etc. John Quincy Adams said, stay, don't worry about it. Put him up in the Blue Room there at Peacefield, and got to know them. And they had a lot of conversations. And John Quincy Adams took a liking to him. The man was poor, but educated. And so they actually had a lot to talk about. And when he understood that this man, he couldn't make a living in this blizzard, he couldn't go house to house selling his wares, he actually arranged a fair there at his own mansion at Peacefield, and invited the staff of his household, told the staff of his household to set up a fair, and then invited the neighbors who came by sleigh and said, you should buy goods from this man. He's a good man. And then when he thought that Abraham was selling his goods too cheaply, he actually said, no, that's not the right price. You should get more for that. And when the goods quickly ran out, John Quincy Adams sent a sleigh to Boston to pick up more goods for Abraham Hyman, and then continued to invite the neighbors to buy goods for him. And of course, first of all, it saved his life from being caught out in the blizzard, but actually really got him started on the way to becoming a successful merchant in the United States. Now, what was interesting is he'd been there a few days, and the fair and everything. And then I think it was on the fifth day of the visit, John Quincy Adams comes downstairs and he finds Abraham dressed in his finest clothes. And he says, oh, you're not working today? And he says, no, today is Shabbos. It's our Sabbath. And John Quincy Adams was very impressed by that this man who was willing to work so hard that he would go out and risk being caught in a blizzard to earn a few pennies to support his family, come Shabbos, no work, of course. This is a time to rest, to enjoy, to give thanks to God, and to learn. And he was actually in John Quincy Adams' library and looking through his books. And then that really impressed John Quincy Adams, and their friendship deepened, and they enjoyed learning and conversing together. Interestingly, the story doesn't end there. Eventually, the winter ended. Actually, Abraham ended up staying with John Quincy Adams for 2 months. Right? So Adams really took a liking to him. He stayed there for 2 months, eventually went on his way. Years later, the story picks up again, and Abraham Hyman at some point met a more recent immigrant doing the same thing that he was doing, peddling from door to door. Abraham was still doing that, just I guess more successfully. But it was winter again, and so Abraham invited this other peddler to come with him and to stay by his friend. Apparently, Abraham Hyman had become a regular house guest by John Quincy Adams. Adams, who, by the way, ended up dying in 1848. He'd been president from 1825 to 1829, and this is happening in the 30s. So Abraham Hyman brings this new friend, also a Jewish peddler, not a friend, really an acquaintance, brings him with him. Adams is perfectly happy to host not only Abraham Hyman, but also the other peddler, the new friend. They settle in. A couple days go by, and it's Shabbos, right? So John Quincy Adams comes downstairs, and as expected, Abraham Hyman is all dressed up for Shabbos, and he's taking his rest. But the other peddler is not there. And Adams says, where's the other guy? Turns out that the other fellow, when he heard that Abraham would not be going out to peddle his wares because it was Shabbos, he felt, I'll have no competition in the neighborhood today. And so he went out and, busily was starting to peddle. He's obviously not a Shabbos observant Jew. This enraged John Quincy Adams. he hated the idea that there was a Jew who had come along with his friend Abraham Hyman, but who was not keeping Shabbos like Abraham. And in fact, John Quincy Adams sent out the word that the neighbors should not buy goods from this other fellow. And, it definitely hurt his business. And, what can we learn from that? For whatever reason, John Quincy Adams, as we say in the observant Jewish world, he liked his Jews Jewy, right? But more important, he respected a man who lived according to principles. Just as Adams lived according to his principles, he respected Abraham Hyman for living according to his principles and the principles of his people. You make of it what you will. This is a true story. It's not, readily around, but Ami Magazine reported it. As I mentioned, first written down in 1924. The author heard it from Abraham Hyman's son, whom he met at a shiva, presumably sometime in the early 1900s. What a story, huh? Okay. And when I come to questions and comments, if you have questions and comments about that story, I'm sure we'll have a bit of a discussion. So put that in there, please. Okay. And we're going to get to it soon because today's Talmudic discussion is not going to be very lengthy. All right. So we're in the second part of Tractate Pesachim. So the first half was focusing on basically the laws of matzah and not having leaven in our homes during the Passover holiday. The second half of the tractate is more about the Pesach, the Korban Pesach, meaning the Paschal lamb, the Passover offering that was brought when the temple was standing in Jerusalem. Tragically, we haven't been able to bring that offering for 2,000 years. The Mishna that we are discussing seems to be a little bit of a digression because it is talking about the Chagigah, not the Passover offering itself, but the festival peace offering that was brought on all the pilgrimage festivals, meaning Passover, Shavuos, and Sukkot, that while you make that pilgrimage up to Jerusalem, you should also bring these additional offerings which enable you to rejoice on the festival. Right? So the actual festival offerings, it's called the Chagigah. Chag is the word for festival in Hebrew. And so the Chagigah is the festival peace offering, and that's actually obligatory for the people who go to Jerusalem. Unlike the Pesach, which you slaughter in the afternoon before Passover begins, the Chagigah needed to be slaughtered during the festival. So it's part of the celebration. You would have slaughtered it during the festival itself on the first day, not the previous night when the festival actually began, but the next day during daylight. That's when you would bring that offering, and it's part of the rejoicing. As the Talmud often says, there is no joy without meat. That is specifically talking about on a festival and about the Chagigah. In this Mishnah, we're talking about something a little related but not the same, which was there was the Chagigah of Erev Pesach. Right? So we learned in the Mishnah that there's an additional offering that would only be brought sometimes, where there's the Chagigah to slaughtered on the festival to enhance the rejoicing. That's obligatory for the pilgrims that make that pilgrimage to Jerusalem. The Chagigah of Erev Pesach, the afternoon before Passover begins, that would be slaughtered alongside the Paschal lamb, but not always. Only in the situation where the Passover lamb is being slaughtered and it's not Shabbos, meaning when Passover begins Saturday night, you always slaughter on the afternoon. The Passover lamb gets slaughtered on the afternoon before Passover begins. So if Passover starts Saturday night, you'd be slaughtering the Passover lamb Saturday afternoon during Shabbos. It overrides the normal Shabbos prohibition of slaughter. In that situation, you don't bring this additional Chagigah of Erev Pesach, right? But so if Passover is beginning any other night of the week, then you might, if your Passover lamb had a very large group of people registered to it, so they were only going to get a small piece of meat, and they were all in a state of ritual purity, in that case, you'd also bring this extra offering so that the people could, when they ate the lamb that night at the Seder, they could first sort of fill up and feel like they'd eaten and they're full and they feel good, and then have their piece of meat from the Passover lamb itself, or it could be a young goat, which was roasted, and there you were eating it for a spiritual purpose, and you would use this other offering to sort of fill your stomach, just to satisfy your hunger. So that's the Chagigah of Erev Pesach, distinguished from the Chagigah of the festival itself. The Chagigah of Erev Pesach, the afternoon before Passover begins, optional. The Chagigah of a festival, whether it's the first day of Passover or Sukkot or Shavuos, obligatory. Okay, so with respect to that discussion, we learn here at the very bottom of page 70, before we enter page 71, Ula was a sage known for traveling from Israel to the Jewish community in Babylonia and back very often, and bringing teachings between the two places. Ula said that Rabbi Elazar said, with regard to the peace offerings that one slaughtered on the eve of the festival, right? So the Chagigah of Erev Pesach, one fulfills with them neither the mitzvah to bring peace offerings of rejoicing, nor the mitzvah to bring a festival peace offering. And so now we're starting to draw this distinction. So according to Ula, in the name of Rabbi Elazar, if you slaughter this optional Chagigah on the day before Passover begins, it's not going to satisfy either one of these other obligations. What are these other obligations? So one is the actual Chagigah, which is the festival peace offering, which it's obliged to bring if you're in Jerusalem on the day of the festival, right? That's different than the Passover offering. This is one that you would bring anytime there's a festival and you're there on the first day, although it does not override Shabbos. Then there's this other offering, which is about Simcha. Right, so these are additional offerings that you give while you're there, because according to the sages, you should be eating meat every day of the festival that you're in Jerusalem, so that you can fulfill the obligation to rejoice before the Lord your God. Right? It is a mitzvah to rejoice on a festival. How do you rejoice? So one opinion is there is no rejoicing without meat. So you have to bring these other offerings just to eat them, so that you can be eating meat while you're in Jerusalem celebrating this festival. As we'll see later, there's some other opinions that you can rejoice. It's not only with meat that you can rejoice. Okay, but here what Ula is saying in the name of Rabbi Elazar is that this optional offering, which is really meant to sort of fill out the Passover offering, and so you slaughter it on the afternoon before Passover begins, that meat is not going to satisfy either the requirement of the festival offering that everyone brings when they're there, nor that's tied to the festival as a festival offering, nor the additional offerings that one brings just so that they're rejoicing and that they can be rejoicing all 7 days of the holiday that they are there in Jerusalem. So this earlier one is its own thing. It doesn't satisfy these other ones. Okay. And why? Why is that? As it is written, so Deuteronomy 27:7, and you shall slaughter peace offerings and eat there, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God. Based on this verse, we require that the slaughter be at the time of rejoicing. So our rejoicing hasn't begun on the afternoon before Passover began. The rejoicing is after Passover begins. Then we're in the time of our rejoicing. So for satisfying that obligation to be rejoicing before the Lord, there you have to slaughter, these animals that you're going to eat as meat only after the holiday has begun on the festival itself. And if it was slaughtered on the 14th of Nisan Erev Pesach, then it is not fulfilled. It has not been slaughtered at the right time. And with regard to the mitzvah to bring a festival peace offering, right, not just for the purpose of eating meat, but the actual festival peace offering, which is also obligated by the Torah, this is also not fulfilled, for it is something that it is an obligation. That's an obligatory sacrifice. And as everyone is obligated to bring this offering, and the principle is that anything that is an obligation must come only from that which is unconsecrated. Meaning, since you set this up to be an offering on the 14th, so it was already consecrated for a different purpose, right? That was for the Chagigah that accompanies the Passover offering, so there's enough meat that night. And that was not consecrated as specifically the festival peace offering. I know these terms kind of overlap in their translations. It's a little bit hard to keep straight, but hopefully you're with me. Okay, so it had to be. So we've, in other words, what we've discussed here, just to be clear, is 4 different kinds of offerings: the Passover offering itself, the Chagigah of Erev Pesach, the eve of Passover, which is sometimes brought just so that there will be enough meat to eat at the Seder. Then there's the festival peace offering. That's the Chagigah of the festival, which pilgrims are obligated to bring when they're in Jerusalem, of course, only when the temple is standing. And then there's the additional offerings of rejoicing, just so that you have meat to eat while you're rejoicing in Jerusalem. Okay. So according to Ula, in the name of Rabbi Elazar, anything that you set aside to be that Erev Pesach Chagigah, it can't be used. It's already disqualified from being used for either the festival peace offering itself or those additional offerings slaughtered during the festival, just so that we can rejoice by eating meat. But the law does not follow Ula in the name of Rabbi Elazar. Rava raised an objection against the opinion of Ula. It was taught in a Baraisa that the Hallel, so you've heard me recite the Hallel a bunch of times. We say it every month at the beginning of the month for Rosh Chodesh. And of course, we say it on the festivals. We say it every day of the Passover week. We say it every day of the week of Sukkot. We say it on Shavuos. We also say it every day of Hanukkah. And we say it on Purim as well. And so that's basically Psalms 113 through 118. It's something we add to the liturgy in the days of celebration, the festival days, the days of our rejoicing. So Rav is objecting to Ula's opinion by saying it was taught in this Baraisa that the Hallel is recited and the mitzvah, the commandment of rejoicing with peace offerings of rejoicing, right? So these additional offerings for the purpose of rejoicing by eating meat is observed on the festival of Sukkot for 8 days. Now, if you say we require that the slaughter be performed at the time of rejoicing, well, many times you find that the mitzvah of rejoicing is observed for only 7 days, not 8. Such as when the first day of the festival occurs on Shabbos, when a peace offering of rejoicing may not be slaughtered. As we can imagine, these additional offerings, which are just really brought so that we can eat meat and rejoice while we're in Jerusalem on the festival, so we're not going to do that on Shabbos. The Passover lamb, which is commanded specifically in the Torah in its time, at its appointed time, override Shabbos. But these additional offerings for the purpose of rejoicing do not override Shabbos. So when the first day of a festival occurs on Shabbos, the peace offering of rejoicing may not be slaughtered. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehuda, said, one rejoices with male goats of the festivals. That is to say, in such a situation, when the first day of the festival falls on Shabbos, and the mitzvah of rejoicing can still be fulfilled with meat of the goats that are brought on the festivals as sin offerings. As these offerings, being communal offerings, may be slaughtered even on Shabbos. I'm a little bit confused by that because I thought a sin offering is is by individual. So this is referring to a specific kind of communal sin offering, but we'll just leave it at that. Rava said there are two possible responses to refute this. One is that the male goats of the festivals are eaten raw and are not eaten roasted. It's like, ugh. What are we talking about? Sushi, okay, raw fish, but raw goat? Why? Well, because when there's a sin offering brought, a portion of that animal needs to be eaten by the priest so that, the offering can be offered properly. But since the roasting of that meat is not permitted on Shabbos, I guess the priests would, really do their duty by, the people bringing these offerings, and I'm sure they eat a lot, but they ate just a little bit of that goat raw. Being a non-essential part of the service, roasting the meat is forbidden on Shabbos. Therefore, the meat can be eaten only raw, and there is no rejoicing with raw meat. And furthermore, only priests eat of the meat of these sin offerings. The people don't rejoice with them. So this is no way to say that rejoicing is being observed with the raw meat of the goat. With what then do ordinary Israelites rejoice when they're observing the festival in Jerusalem and it's Shabbos and they can't roast meat that day because it happens during the day? Rather, Rav Papa said, in such a situation, one rejoices with clean clothes and aged wine. So if you're, if you're wondering if you're a vegetarian, how could you rejoice if the Talmud says you can only rejoice with meat? Here it says you can rejoice by wearing clean clothes and drinking good wine. When Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, so like Ula, he traveled from one Jewish community to another to share teachings of the sages. He related a different version of what Rabbi Elazar had said. So Ravin is saying, well, I think Ula quoted Rabbi Elazar wrong. With regard to peace offerings that one slaughtered on Erev Pesach, right, the afternoon before Passover began, in fact, on any festival, one fulfills with them the mitzvah to bring peace offerings of rejoicing, but one does not fulfill with them the mitzvah to bring a festival peace offering. So this, right? So if you slaughter a Chagigah for rejoicing before the festival began, in this case to accompany the Passover lamb, you could use that meat for just the rejoicing aspect. You couldn't use that animal to satisfy the obligation to slaughter festival peace offerings. That's its own obligation. But in terms of just having meat to eat in Jerusalem during the pilgrimage, you could satisfy it with this Chagigah that was slaughtered before the festival actually began, on the eve of the festival, says Ravin in the name of Rabbi Elazar. And he explains, one fulfills the mitzvah of rejoicing, because we do not require that the slaughter be performed at the time of rejoicing, since he slaughtered it before the festival actually began, as long as the offering is eaten at the time of rejoicing. But one does not fulfill the mitzvah of the festival peace offering, because the festival peace offering is something that is an obligation, and the principle is that anything that is an obligation must come only from animals that have been consecrated for some other purpose. I'm almost done. I'm going to just mention that the law and then a little bit of background. So the law is, as Ravin explained it, right? So that one can fulfill the mitzvah of to bring the peace offerings of rejoicing with a peace offering that he slaughtered on the eve of the festival, and he did not slaughter additional animals for this purpose during the time of rejoicing. The law follows Ravin and not Ula, because Rabbah and Rabbi Yosef challenged Ula's ruling, and although these questions were answered, Ravin's opinion remained unchallenged and is therefore accepted as the law. And on this question of do we actually, would they ever rejoice with raw meat? In other words, these goats may be eaten on that day, but only raw, since cooking does not override the laws of Shabbos. Even for the priests who would eat the meat raw, consuming the meat of the offering in this manner cannot be described as rejoicing. If they would wait until after Shabbos and eat it roasted, then the slaughter would not have been performed at the time of rejoicing. So how do you rejoice on the Shabbos during a festival when the temple is standing and you've made the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. The Gemara's discussion with regard to rejoicing is connected to what is stated elsewhere, that in the time of the temple, there was no rejoicing without meat and wine. So accordingly, whenever the Torah speaks of rejoicing on a festival, it means that one must eat the meat of the festival offerings. Other activities that lead to joy and pleasure are not inherently included in the mitzvah of rejoicing on the festival, by definition. Nevertheless, the Gemara's conclusion seems to be that even during the time of the temple, the mitzvah of rejoicing on festivals included such things as clean clothes, wine, and new clothes for the women. Right? So part of observing a holiday, of rejoicing properly, is that a husband should buy for his wife some new clothes for the festival. Or if he's not around to do it, she should buy new clothes for herself. For the men, clean clothes will do. The women are entitled to get new clothes to observe a festival with proper rejoicing. All right, let me come to your comments and questions. Michael Diamond. As we no longer sacrifice but replace with prayer, so on Shabbos we have an additional service of Musaf. Do we have a replacement for the Chagigah sacrifice? What a good question, right? So Michael is saying that we don't bring sacrifices anymore. We haven't in about 2,000 years. The daily offerings that were brought in the temple have been replaced. There was a morning sacrifice. There's the morning prayer. There's the afternoon sacrifice. That's the afternoon prayer. There was not an evening sacrifice, and there was a debate about this that we had earlier. I don't know if it was in Tractate Shabbos or in Brachos. Does the evening prayer, is it obligatory since it doesn't replace an evening sacrifice? There was no evening sacrifice, but ultimately the sages concluded that yes, the evening prayer is obligatory for other reasons. And we also say that the three prayer services of the day are tied to Abraham prayed in the morning, Yitzhak prayed in the afternoon, and Yaakov prayed in the evening. Or instituted. Abraham instituted the morning service, Yitzhak instituted the afternoon service, and Yaakov instituted the evening service. And then on Saturday, there's the Musaf, because there was additional Shabbos-specific offerings every Shabbos. And so in our prayers, we also have an additional prayer service on Shabbat, on Saturday mornings, which is called the Musaf Amida, that we add to the morning service only on Saturdays and holidays. So now what Michael is saying is, well, what about this Chagigah? That's not the Musaf. It's not the additional offerings of Shabbos or of the festival. It's the festival peace offering for the rejoicing. So I don't know that we have a specific replacement for that in prayer, although we have Hallel, right? So we have the Hallel that we recite. That is definitely the prayers of thanksgiving and praise and joy and rejoicing that we add on festivals. So perhaps the Hallel is tied to the Chagigah, but also, and the sages discussed this earlier, you have to have a festive meal, right? So it's not just an offering. It's not just the sort of spiritual component of the Korban Pesach, which we don't eat lamb on Passover. We replace that with the kind of matzah and bitter herbs sandwich. But we also have a festive meal. It is commanded on Passover to have a festive meal, and you should have a festive meal on Shabbos, and you should have a festive meal on every holiday. So perhaps that is what's tied to the Chagigah. Yehudit, Sal, I was worried about listening to your story about your mother and grandmother of blessed memory due to the fact that most of my ancestors perished in Auschwitz and Mauthausen, and those who survived were forced to live in the Budapest ghetto, including my parents, during the Holocaust. My grandmother of blessed memory occasionally spoke about family members, often crying. Yehudit says, I admire your courage, Sal, to discuss the Holocaust as it relates to your family. It is so important never to forget these personal perseverances. Thank you. Thank you, Yehudit. I discussed this with Jessica, the host who interviewed me on that talk earlier. If you missed it, it's available right there on our page at Accidental Talmudist on Facebook. where I told my family story in the Holocaust in an interview with Jessica Shaw, sponsored by the Museum of the Holocaust in New York, the Museum of Jewish Legacy, a living memorial to the Holocaust. And as we were getting ready for the talk, we were talking about the fact that, my mother was such a young survivor. She was born in 1944. She was in a concentration camp as an infant, an utterly miraculous story that my grandmother was able to carry an infant successfully through a concentration camp. And so I thought, my mom lives long enough and could keep telling her story. She might be one of the last survivors able to tell her family's story. Tragically, my mom has dementia, so she can no longer tell her own story. And so, like so many families, now it falls to me. My grandmother's gone. My mother can't tell her own story. And so it's now the next generation. And, the Holocaust was 70 years ago. Unless miraculous things happen in medicine, the time is not that far away when there just won't be any more survivors to tell their own story. In the same way there was a time when there were no longer Civil War veterans to tell their story, the American Civil War, etc. And so it's such a responsibility on those of us who've heard these stories firsthand as family lore to share those stories. Of course, so that it should never happen again, but also because it was such a big and rich and vibrant world that was lost, right? That world, that old world of European Jewry. And it's only in these tales that world lives on. So I take that responsibility very seriously. And, any of you who are the descendants of survivors, tell the story. Tell the story. My mother, almost never talked about it. My grandmother almost never talked about it. But thank God I sat them both down at different times and recorded them telling the story. So we have that for posterity. And, and it was such an important influence in my life. And of course, I told the story and how it links up to becoming the accidental Talmudist. But anybody who has these stories in their family, and of course, this applies to all family lore. What is the Talmud? It's the oral tradition in Judaism, and every tradition has its oral tradition. Honor it. Honor it. Thank you, Sharon. We don't say Hallel on Purim. That was my mistake. Thank you for that. Sharon also says, I have a question that has been on my mind for the past several pages. There is so much discussion on the need for proper intention during the sacrifices. How do they know what the person's intention was? Is someone supposed to announce their proper intention when bringing a sacrifice? So that's a great question. So many of these practices, they haven't been done in 2,000 years. So all we can talk about is what's written there in the Talmud. But since, you couldn't bring a sacrifice in the temple on your own, right? Like the priest had to do it for you. So when you bring it to the priest, so then you're going to tell him what kind of offering it is. And at that time, you've announced your intention. But if the priest made a mistake, right, and he confused two offerings and brought one offering that was intended to be for one kind of sacrifice, and he brought it as a different sacrifice, so then there would be a problem. And definitely tomorrow, we're going to be discussing this next Mishna, the third Mishna of chapter 6. It's on this page, but I'm going to put it in tomorrow's discussion since the discussion of that Mishnah continues on page 72. But what to do, right? When an offering was brought for one purpose and was sacrificed for a different, sometimes that it's sort of like the sacrifice can be rescued. Sometimes it can't. If it's sacrificed for the wrong purpose, sometimes it's just fully disqualified, and you still owe to bring for whatever purpose you needed to bring a sacrifice in the first place. Or there's a consecrated animal, as we discussed yesterday. It can't be brought back into the flock. So even if it was offered, it was brought for the wrong intention and then disqualified, had to be replaced, then you still, the animal is set aside. So yeah, there's definitely this question of having intention and when is it announced. Sometimes these laws are only going to apply to a pious person. It's probably a pious person who's bringing an offering anyway. Only he or she knows whether they had the right intention or not. But since they're pious in the first place and they want to know what is the remedy for the mistake that they made, that's where these laws apply. It's not that, there's an offering police who's going to come down on them and tell them what to do. It's that they want to know how to handle the situation where they made a mistake. But part of the teaching here, as we'll see tomorrow, is that it's not enough to say, all right, I'm going to bring the offering and I'm going to do everything I need to bring the offering, and then you bring the offering. Just like it's not really enough to just pray and go through the motions. You also have to bring your sechel, right? You have to bring your intelligence and your sense and your awareness and your intentionality so that you get it right the first time. If you get it wrong, okay, you made an unwitting mistake, and sometimes then you become liable to bring a sin offering depending on the situation. But I think the overall lesson is, in our avoda, in our service to God, don't just go through the motions. Be as mindful as possible so that you don't find yourself committing a mistake. And I know that sometimes when I don't, pray first thing in the morning, and I was like, oh no, there's something else I got to do first. And then I get involved in my work in the morning, and then one thing leads to another. And then all of a sudden I get to where I missed the morning service, right? Or it's just near the end and I almost missed it. And then I rush into it, and that's on me. That's on me. I should have made it my business to do it first thing. I should have made it my business to prioritize the morning prayers over other matters that seemed so important in my day. And we learned in Brachos that sometimes you just miss a service, and then what do? So then there's a makeup amida that you could do at the next service. But when you avail yourself of that remedy, so you're also supposed to make a teshuvah and apologize to God and say, okay, I'm offering an additional amida to make up for the one I missed this morning. But then you're also tasked with saying, okay, now the reason I missed this morning is, specifically, this morning I got caught up in this and I was busy and I didn't prioritize you, God. I prioritized myself, and this is the reason. And please, God, strengthen me to not make that mistake again tomorrow, so I shouldn't be standing before you again having made the same mistake, right? And that's a thought process that we can always engage in when we find ourselves, messing up on the intentionality or the execution of our service to the Almighty. Okay, that's what I've got for us this evening. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, Monday, at the regular time with page 72 of Tractate Pesachim. May you have whatever's left of your weekend. It should be sweet. And if you're on the East Coast and it's snowing like crazy, may you be safe and snug and warm. And we say amen and good night.